I stared at the muddy water pooling in my yard as Richard Holden, my neighbor of 8 years, slammed his door in my face. My hands were shaking. After months of mysterious plant deaths and my children's escalating respiratory issues, I'd finally discovered what had been poisoning my family, and the man responsible had just laughed in my face. My property, my rules, he'd sneered through the crack in his door. Maybe fix your drainage instead of blaming others. I stood there silently, the soil sample report clutched in my fist, rain beginning to soak through my jacket. 5 minutes earlier, I'd shown him undeniable proof that he'd been diverting his septic runoff onto the back corner of my property for years. His response? A dismissive laugh before telling me no judge would side with the new guy against someone whose family had been in the neighborhood for 3 generations. I turned away, took 3 steps down his perfect brick walkway, then stopped. Without thinking, I pivoted, marched to his pristine landscaped flower bed, and dropped the lab report into the center of his prized rose bushes. Then I took out my phone and snapped a photo of his illegal drainage setup before walking away. The doorbell chimed behind me. I didn't look back. You did what? Sarah's voice echoed through our kitchen as she paced back and forth. My wife had always been the diplomatic one, the peacekeeper who'd brought cookies to every neighbor when we'd moved in. I showed him proof that he's been poisoning our yard and possibly making Jason's asthma worse, and he laughed at me. I scrolled through the photos I'd taken, showing her the cleverly disguised pipe that diverted water from his property to ours. Tom, you can't just accuse Richard like that. His wife is the HOA president. His brother-in-law is on the city council. Sarah ran her fingers through her hair. We need this neighborhood. Jason's school is here. My job is 5 minutes away. So we should just let him pump raw sewage into our yard? Let our kids play in contaminated soil? I felt the anger rising again. The test results don't lie, Sarah. The samples I took from that corner of our yard showed fecal coliform bacteria. It's not just water, it's actual sewage. She sank into a chair. Are you absolutely sure? I slid the lab report across the table. I paid for the comprehensive panel. That's not rainwater, Sarah. That's human waste. And based on how established that drainage system is, it's been happening since before we bought the house. Sarah's face paled as she read the report. I could see the moment her concern for neighborhood harmony gave way to maternal protection. Jason's infections, his breathing problems getting worse this past year. Exactly. I reached for her hand. I tried to be reasonable. I went over with proof, neighbor to neighbor. He laughed and slammed the door in my face. Her fingers tightened around mine. What do we do now? I'm calling the city inspector tomorrow. I pulled up my phone calendar. But first, I'm going to document everything. And I mean everything. The doorbell rang, startling us both. Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide. That's probably Linda from the HOA. Richard's wife, I muttered. Perfect. I opened the door to find not just Linda Holden, but 3 other neighbors standing on our porch. Their expressions ranged from concerned to openly hostile. Thomas, Linda said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. We need to discuss the accusations you've been making against my husband. By Friday morning, half the neighborhood wasn't speaking to us. My Facebook feed was filled with not-so-subtle posts about troublemakers and people who don't fit the community. Linda had called an emergency HOA meeting for Saturday, supposedly about drainage issues, but really about us. You need to calm down, Sarah said, watching me pace our living room. We have the environmental inspector coming Monday. We just need to wait and let them control the narrative. I gestured toward the window, where I could see 2 neighbors in animated conversation, occasionally glancing toward our house. Richard's telling everyone I'm making it up because I'm jealous of his landscaping awards. And people are believing him. Sarah sighed. Tom, I know you're angry. I'm not angry. I'm terrified. Have you seen how pale Jason looks lately? His doctor appointment isn't for 2 weeks, but I'm worried. The sound of our son's coughing from upstairs cut me off mid-sentence. Sarah and I exchanged glances before she hurried up to check on him. I grabbed my laptop and sat down at the kitchen table. If Richard wanted to play dirty, literally, I needed to be prepared. I began documenting everything. Dates of Jason's illnesses, photos of our dying plants, screenshots of weather reports showing the flooding pattern. I created a timeline of every interaction I'd had with Richard since we moved in. When Sarah came back downstairs, her face was grim. His inhaler isn't helping much. I think we should take him to urgent care. 4 hours later, the doctor confirmed what I'd feared. Jason's lungs showed signs of infection. They admitted him overnight for observation and started him on antibiotics. As I sat next to my son's hospital bed, watching his small chest rise and fall with each labored breath, something inside me hardened. This wasn't just about property lines anymore. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of Jason sleeping with the oxygen tube in his nose. Then I typed a message to my old college roommate who now worked as an environmental attorney. Mark, I need your help. It's about my son. The folder sat on our kitchen table like a bomb waiting to detonate. Inside was everything Mark had helped me compile over the past week. The soil analysis reports, the medical records showing the correlation between heavy rains and Jason's respiratory infections, the property survey showing the illegal drainage modification, and statements from 2 previous homeowners who'd suspected something was wrong but could never prove it. Are you sure about this? Sarah asked, her hand resting on top of the folder. Jason was finally home from the hospital, still on antibiotics but breathing easier. We've tried being reasonable, I said quietly. We tried talking to them directly. We tried going through proper channels. The city inspector came and went, and somehow Richard knew exactly when he was coming and had temporarily blocked the drainage pipe. The inspector found nothing conclusive despite the soil samples. Sarah nodded slowly. Linda's brother-in-law on the city council. Exactly. I tapped the folder. Mark says we have enough for a civil case, possibly even criminal charges for knowingly contaminating our property and endangering a child. But going public with this? Sarah hesitated. The whole neighborhood will take sides. They already have, I said bitterly. Did you see the HOA newsletter? They're implementing a landscaping improvement mandate specifically for our street. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at it and her expression darkened. That was Lisa from across the street. The HOA meeting has been moved up to tonight. Emergency session. Perfect, I said, picking up the folder. I'll be ready. Sarah placed her hand on my arm. Tom, wait. Maybe we should try one more time to resolve this privately. For Jason's sake. This is for Jason's sake. I pulled up a photo on my phone, our son in his hospital bed. This is what handling it privately got us. I'm done playing nice with people who are literally making our child sick. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Okay, she finally said. But let's be smart about this. If we're going to war with the Holdens, we need allies. I paused, lowering the folder. What do you have in mind? She picked up her phone. Remember Mrs. Parker? The elderly woman at the end of the cul-de-sac? She told me once that her garden used to win competitions until about 10 years ago when everything started dying on the side facing the Holdens. My eyes widened. You think? I think Richard's been doing this to more than just us. After 6 weeks of careful planning and documentation, we were ready. By the time we arrived at the community center for the HOA meeting, Sarah had coordinated with 12 neighbors. Had agreed to meet us early, including families who had recently moved away but returned specifically for this confrontation. Mrs. Parker was already waiting, leaning on her cane, her weathered face set in determination. Show me what you found, she said without preamble. I opened the folder and spread out the soil analysis reports, pointing to the high concentrations of contaminants. This is from our yard, near the property line with the Holdens. And this, I said, pulling out another report, is from the public park behind their house. Mrs. Parker nodded grimly. My roses used to win blue ribbons. Then 10 years ago, right after Richard installed that fancy new landscaping, everything started dying. I had experts out, changed my soil, tried everything. The Johnsons arrived next, followed by the Patels and Dr. Rodriguez. Each had their own story, mysterious drainage issues, unexplained pet illnesses, persistent mold problems. Richard has been on the zoning board for 15 years, Dr. Rodriguez explained quietly. His wife runs the HOA. His brother-in-law works for the city. Nobody wanted to challenge them. I laid out the evidence we gathered. The soil reports, the property surveys showing the altered drainage, the medical reports, and finally, the photos taken from our property line and public areas that showed the hidden pipe system redirecting water from the Holden's property to surrounding yards. It's deliberate, I concluded. He's been systematically diverting not just rainwater, but septic runoff away from his property onto everyone else's for years. Mrs. Parker's wrinkled hand closed over mine. My late husband always said something wasn't right. I wish he could see this. The door opened, and Linda Holden walked in with her HOA entourage. She stopped short at the sight of our impromptu meeting. Well, she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. I see some people got the time wrong. We don't start for another 20 minutes. Actually, I said, standing up, we're right on time for what we need to discuss. Linda's smile faltered as she noticed the documents spread across the table. Behind her, Richard appeared in the doorway, his face darkening as he recognized Mrs. Parker and the others sitting with us. What's all this? He demanded. Evidence, I replied calmly, sliding a copy of the environmental report toward him. Not just from my property, but from 5 others surrounding yours. The room went silent as Richard stared at the document, his face flushing red. This is absurd, Linda cut in. Richard is a respected member of this community, a respected member who's been poisoning his neighbor's properties for over a decade. Mrs. Parker interrupted, her voice quavering but firm. My Harold always said something wasn't right, and now we have proof. Richard's face contorted. You can't prove anything. My property is up to code. Every inspection has confirmed it. Funny how those inspections always happen after you've temporarily blocked your drainage system, I said, advancing toward him with my phone. I swiped to show a time-lapse of photos taken over the past month, showing the drainage pipe being blocked before the inspector's visit and uncovered afterward. My security cameras on my own property have excellent resolution and a clear view of your drainage outflow point. Richard lunged for the phone. You can't just record my property. No more illegal than diverting sewage onto neighbors' land. Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward, holding up pictures of his children. My twins have had recurring respiratory issues for 3 years, ever since we moved in next to you. The meeting room door opened again, and Mark walked in, carrying his briefcase. Sorry I'm late. Traffic was terrible. He surveyed the room and extended his hand to Richard. Mark Daniels, environmental attorney. I understand you're the man responsible for this impressive network of illegal drainage modifications. Richard's face went from red to white. His eyes darted around the room, from the gathered neighbors to the documents on the table, to Mark's professional demeanor. This is ridiculous, Linda sputtered. You can't just come in here making wild accusations. They're not accusations, Sarah said quietly, stepping forward with Jason's medical file. My 8-year-old son spent 3 days in the hospital last week with a severe respiratory infection. His doctor found contaminants in his system consistent with exposure to raw sewage. Her voice broke slightly. The same contaminants found in our backyard soil. The soil where he plays. Linda blinked rapidly, her composure slipping. She turned to Richard, who was staring fixedly at the floor. Richard, she said uncertainly. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Richard Holden. His shoulders slumped slightly. It was just supposed to be rainwater, he muttered. The drainage patterns changed after they built the new subdivision up the hill. My property was flooding. So you decided to make it everyone else's problem? I asked. He glared at me. Do you know how much it would have cost to install proper drainage? Tens of thousands. And the landscaping damage would have cost you your precious gardening trophies. Mrs. Parker interrupted, her voice sharp with decades of resentment. Richard's face hardened. This is private property business. You can't prove anything definitively. Mark cleared his throat. Actually, Mr. Holden, we can. I've been building this case for over 2 months now. I've filed comprehensive reports with the EPA, the State Environmental Agency, and the County Health Department, including testimonies from previous homeowners dating back 12 years. They're sending a joint inspection team next week. He smiled thinly. And unlike the city inspector, they don't answer to your brother-in-law. The color drained from Richard's face. Linda stepped forward, her voice suddenly conciliatory. I'm sure we can work something out privately, as neighbors. There's no need for government agencies, like the private discussion I tried to have with your husband last week. I asked, when he laughed and slammed the door in my face. My son was hospitalized, Sarah said quietly. This isn't a neighborhood dispute anymore. The room fell silent again, broken only when Mrs. Parker slowly rose to her feet. For 10 years, she said, her voice quavering with age and emotion, I've watched my garden die. Harold's roses, the ones he planted on our 40th anniversary, all dead. When I complained, Richard told everyone I was just a confused old woman who couldn't garden anymore. She pointed a shaking finger at Richard. I want everyone to know what you did. One by one, the other neighbors stood up, each with their own story of property damage, pet illnesses, and mysterious problems that now made perfect sense. Richard's face had gone from white to gray. Linda was frantically texting someone, presumably her brother-in-law. Here's what's going to happen, Mark said, his tone professional but firm. Mr. Holden will immediately cease all illegal drainage activities and begin remediation of affected properties, starting with professional soil testing and replacement where necessary. He will cover all medical expenses related to contamination exposure, and he will pay damages to be determined in court unless he prefers to settle. Richard's eyes narrowed. Or, Mark smiled thinly, or the EPA findings become public record. I file a class action lawsuit on behalf of everyone in this room and anyone else affected, and the county prosecutor decides whether there's enough evidence for criminal negligence charges. He paused. I believe endangering a child's health elevates the potential charges significantly. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Richard slumped into a chair. I never meant for anyone to get sick, he muttered. But they did, I said quietly, thinking of Jason struggling to breathe in his hospital bed. And you knew why, and you did nothing. Linda's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her face fell. My brother-in-law says the EPA has jurisdiction. He can't stop this. Richard buried his face in his hands. Mrs. Parker thumped her cane on the floor. I want my soil fixed first. I've waited 10 years to grow roses again. One by one, the neighbors began talking, no longer afraid, no longer isolated, but united in their demand for justice. As the impromptu negotiation began, Sarah slipped her hand into mine and squeezed. You did it, she whispered. I shook my head slightly. We did it. All of us. I looked around at our neighbors, not the ones who had shunned us, but the ones who had been silently suffering just like we had. Sometimes it takes one person standing up to make others brave enough to do the same. As I watched Richard Holden slumped in defeat while Mark outlined the terms of remediation, I felt no triumph, only relief. My son would be safe. Our home would be safe. And sometimes, that's all the victory you need. Would you have confronted your neighbor publicly like I did, or tried to keep working through official channels? When does a neighborhood dispute cross the line from private matter to public health concern?